Hello, History 8. This is our lecture video for Friday, April 17th, 2020. So this is a brand new chapter. It's all about the last frontier, the last land rush, that kind of stuff. Life is kind of changing for the United States as people just don't need to go west as much anymore. We're just going to kind of talk about the beginning. I love this chapter because we've got outlaws, we've got cowboys, all kinds of cool stuff in here. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorites. So hopefully you guys like it too. I do have a couple pictures to show you. I don't think there are any videos for today you have to watch except there's this video. Yep, this is the only video for today. So make sure you watch this video. Make sure you don't forget to send me the code word when you're done watching the video. Yeah, so that's this chapter. And remember, all homework from this week is due on Monday. So don't forget to send me all of your stuff. So the last frontier is this chapter, and it talks about here that the term frontier refers to the outer fringe of settlement, like the edges of settlement. Now, the thing is that ours keeps moving. When we first started this book at the beginning, it was like the Appalachian Mountains was the frontier. It was west. Then it was onto the Mississippi River. Then it was all the way to the west. And then when we found golds, then we went all the way to the west coast, all the way to the ocean. But this is kind of the funny part. We just kind of skip a whole section of the country, and that's just kind of the middle from the Mississippi River to the Great Basin. And so the Great Plains and the area right around the Rocky Mountains is just kind of empty until after the Civil War. And so there are a couple of reasons for it. One is there's just a lot of Indian tribes in this area. They think that it could have been as many as 300,000 Indians. There were quite a different tribes there. One group, they practiced agriculture. There were others who, they would hunt deer, elk, and moose. And then there were others who, used the salmon from the rivers. Then along the Pacific coast, they would hunt and gather food from all the different coastal resources. And so the removal of all these populations was avoidable, but unfortunately the Indian way of life suffered because we started migrating in and it kind of changed their life. First of all, all those animals, deer, elk, and moose, well, if we're here too and we're also eating them, they're going to run low on those animals and stuff. And so it just kind of caused a problem. But there were a lot of hindrances and reasons people didn't want to settle in the West or in this part of the West. First of all, they thought the soil was not fertile. It was just very rocky. It was hard. It was not the soil they were used to, and they just didn't think it would grow stuff. The climate didn't seem suitable. The winters, you guys know, in the plains, they're cold. The summers are very hot. And another thing is that rainfall is scarce in some areas of it as well. A lot of areas receive less than 20 inches of rain a year, and so a good water supply is rare. Think about like Kansas and Oklahoma. Do you think of a lot of water when you think of those places? I really don't. So there's just not a lot of water. Plus, if you get really far out into the trees, or into the plains, we have trees, but we don't have a lot. But if you get to Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, it's nothing. There aren't trees. And so how do you grow a house? How do you build a house when you don't have logs, to build your log cabin? And so it just wasn't what they were used to. It was hard. And so it was very different. Even though they had all of these discouragements and the huge Indian population, though, people really wanted to move west. A lot of people thought city life was dangerous. There were a lot of diseases, and so they thought it was better to move west for their families. And so they wanted to kind of determine their own destiny. They wanted to make change for themselves. A nice part is there were a lot of technological advances, including the railroads, and that helped people move west. And if you think about inventions like the steel plow, well, that makes, plowing this hard soil way easier. And so it made them, it made it easier for them to do what they needed to do. The crew members, one thing though that you will start to notice is during this time period, the buffalo herd started to die down. People loved buffalo. They would actually the people who were helping build railroads would shoot buffalo to prevent them from damaging the tracks. They would also shoot them for food or for fun. Sometimes trains would just stop, and so the passengers could have fun and shoot a buffalo. And so over the years, the vast herds of buffalo on which the nomadic Indians depended declined. And so here I have a picture of a buffalo. I think buffalo are cool. I like weird animals. I know you guys are probably like, what? She loves moose and buffalo? Yes, I do. And so here's kind of a picture of that. And it actually comes to the point where people would buy buffalo bones. I don't remember what they were used for. In our last history book, we would talk about what it was used for, and I can't quite remember. But you could sell the bones, and you didn't make a ton of money. It took quite a few bones for you to make money. You can see like here a pile of buffalo hides and bones and stuff. You could make money, but you had to sell a lot of the bones to make money, and so people would go out and kill buffalo to gain money off of their bones. Sorry, I do not remember what they used them for. But anyway, they were important. So a lot of people from different nations settled the West. A lot of the settlers were whites of European descent. German, Irish, and Scandinavian people settled in remote areas like the Dakotas. Asians, especially the Chinese, would work on those railroad tracks, and more than 200,000 Chinese people went west between 1876 and 1890. And by 1880, as many as 26,000 blacks migrated from the south to Kansas. They were called exodusters, which has to do with the Old Testament. And hopefully you remember in the last chapter or two, we've talked about segregation and how people, not just in the South, but especially in the South, were not treating blacks equally. Even though they were freed from slavery, they weren't treated well. And so a lot of them kind of moved north to escape all of that. And so more than 500,000 blacks lived west of the Mississippi River by 1880. And it wasn't just they wanted to flee the South. They also wanted to flee the East and go west to get away from segregation and just feel like equals as they are. Now, the first large group of settlers, which we've talked about, that went west were obviously the miners. When gold is found in 1848, people are like, I'm going to get rich. I'm going west. And so prospectors would go, but then gold would run out, and so they had to turn to other jobs, or they would just move on somewhere else. Some people would wander into the mountains and the areas of the West, but they kept finding more gold. So it wasn't, and I wouldn't say just gold, they found other things as well, which we're going to talk about. So there were several new gold and silver strikes that brought more miners to the West. The first big one occurred in 1859, which is near Pikes Peak. I have a map that I'm going to show you. It's kind of blurry, unfortunately. But you can kind of see, so in spots that are red, those are like the mining centers. Sorry, it's really blurry. I can't really read it. So like if you see red on this map, that's where like mining centers were. So you can kind of see here. There's quite a bit of red. And you can kind of see where they were going and that kind of thing. And it really does make a difference for settling these areas. So, so it was actually, I said Pikes Peak in Colorado, but it was actually part of the Kansas Territory at this point in time. Many prospectors went there, and they had like on their wagons written Pikes Peak or bust. But this doesn't make very many people rich. But it does bring attention to the region, so then more people start coming. Then there's another big strike when James Finney and Henry Comstock were mining gold in northern Nevada, and they struck an even richer one. They mined just the surface, and when they were mining just the very surface, they were making $5 a day. Then they started digging, and 2 feet below the surface, they found ore that made their take rise to $20 a day. And at 4 feet, they hit this heavy blue-black sand. It had gold in it, but it doesn't seem pure because there's this this blue substance there, and they don't know what it is. And so they did not realize what they found was the end of a rich lode, L-O-D-E, which is a deposit of precious metal, which, by the way, your code word today is lode, L-O-D-E. So send that to me. All right. So anyway, so it was like nearly pure silver. So they're like, what is this blue stuff? It's getting in the way of the gold. It's important too. So they were pretty bummed. Can you imagine like later finding out what you actually found? Kind of like Columbus, like, what did I find? Oh, he never knew. So anyway, so this lode, which they call the Comstock lode, which Comstock and Finney do eventually find out it's not as bad as Columbus. They do eventually realize what they found. They yielded more than $400 million worth of precious metals. 55% was silver and 45% was gold. So it's a huge find for them. And then farther north, the Fraser and Columbia River valleys also yielded rich finds. There were strikes in Idaho and Montana along the Bitterroot and Salmon rivers, which attracted thousands of miners. In 1864, there were prospectors that discovered gold in Helena and Butte, Montana. In the 1880s, copper mines were also found in this area as well. And the city of Butte was actually built over a vein that was a mile deep. So then in 1876, there were two soldiers with prospecting experience, and they found gold in the Black Hills of South Dakota. This is actually the area where Mount Rushmore is located, if you've ever been there. And this area belonged to the Sioux Indians. Obviously, that's a problem because when people find out, they're going to want to go into this area, but that area is the Indians' area. So there were some issues there. The Army was there to try to keep miners out, but it did not do that. And the government tried to buy the land back from the Sioux. And so 2 wars actually followed with the Sioux Indians. Nevertheless, though, the miners get what they want. And the resulting Homestake Mine, which is near Deadwood, South Dakota, became the world's single richest gold mine. And then mining camps and boom towns. Some miners went west alone, but a lot of times it was recommended for 4-man companies, so you're not completely alone. And they would set up like mining camps. It would be like a quick built camp. You'd have tents or these like poorly constructed, they're called brush arbors. It's not somewhere you really want to live. And they staked claims quickly. So you'd be like, this is my area that I'm gonna, mine. And they had to work, there was a deal, like it was kind of an unofficial but kind of official rule. So you claimed this area and you had to work it 1 day in 3. So every 3 days you had to work one of those days. If a miner did not show up after 10 days, someone else could claim that land. Of course, the mining claims were not really official because the miners don't actually even own the land. So I don't know how they can officially claim land when it's not theirs. And so they depended on what's called a claim society that they organized to protect their interests. As more people go west, businesses get smart and start going too. There were supply stores and saloons, which is pretty much a bar. They do have like food too, though. It's like a bar and grill. And they were usually the first businesses to arrive in an area. Then there would usually be a meeting where they would plan a town. Streets were drawn out and there was a town name that they picked. They would draw lots for home sites. They would build a church, a school. They'd have processing mills for the ore, and other buildings would soon dot the town's horizon. Where services were lacking, smart people could charge kind of whatever they wanted. So like, for example, one woman, this is genius, she made $18,000 in 1 year by baking pies for the miners. She knows, right, that food is the best way to make your money. And so she made pies. Can you imagine $18,000 back then for baking pies? A few people did make fortunes in mining, but most of them made just a living. And so if the ore ran out, prices dropped and the mines would close. Miners, storekeepers, hotel owners, and their families left. So all of this stuff they built is just there. Kind of like I showed you pictures in the last chapter. They were just ghost towns. They were empty. And so that's just kind of too bad. Sometimes you would also have like railroad towns that were built up along the railroads. Those would die out. Cow towns, lumber towns, and even farm towns across the West that just became these ghost towns. And there is a show, I'm going to talk about Hallmark, so there you go. There's a show called When Calls the Heart on Hallmark, and that's kind of part of the show is they have a mine. I think it's a coal mine, though. They have a mine, and there's an accident in the mine, and they have to close the mine, and, like, the whole town is, like, it's going to, what do we have left in the town? So they have to find something new to bring in money because otherwise the town is going to become a ghost town. And so that's kind of what the show is all about. They do find, other options with railroads, and then they eventually strike oil. But yeah, it was all important about, how do we keep this town from dying out? Now, mining precious metals obviously helps the economy because we have more gold. Remember, we've talked about this before. Like if you have $1, right, it's a piece of paper. That dollar technically is only worth the paper it's printed on if we don't have something called a gold standard. And what that is it requires us, like the government of the United States, to have gold to back up all of that money in the treasury. Okay, so we have to have gold for every dollar we print. That's called the gold standard. Well, some people during this time, especially because we were finding a lot of silver, were like, why can't we have silver as well? And so people wanted coinage for silver, and they also wanted it to be where it could be backed by silver or gold. So they stopped buying silver, the government, for a while, and that caused the cost of silver, like the price of it, to plummet. And so they were like, please, let's make it where money is backed by silver and gold. And so some people were like, let's just start, printing more money and have more money, because if we have more money, then, it'll be easier to pay off debt and stuff. So in 1878, Congress kind of compromised. They passed the Bland-Allison Act. It set the price of silver at 16 to 1, a 16 to 1 ratio. So you needed 16 ounces of silver, which is equal to 1 ounce of gold. It also required the Secretary of the Treasury to buy $2 million to $4 million a month in silver at the market price, and then they would use that to coin money. So like our dimes and our quarters and stuff like that. But it still had to be backed by gold. So like all of your coins still had to be backed by gold. Even though they might have enough silver in them to make them worth a quarter, they still have to have a quarter's worth of money in the treasury. Farmers, silver miners, and mine owners are not happy with this. They want it to be able to be backed by silver and gold, not just gold. And so actually it grows so much that by 1896, the Democratic Party was supporting free silver, which is the use of both gold and silver coinage as its party platform. So that is it for today. Don't forget, got to remember the code word, to send me your code word, okay? And I hope that you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday.